Hello, R.C. Morton here, and today I'm going to talk about the F-100, the Super Saber, also known as the Hun. The Super Saber, the F-100, was built by North American Aviation, and they had quite a legacy. They had developed the P-51 and the F-86 Saber prior to the F-100, so they had quite a success with those two aircraft. And so they wanted to enter into this competition with the other manufacturers for the second generation jets. And there they turned out the F-100 Hun. And they built these aircraft and used by the Air Force from 1953 through 1973. Some of the Air National Guard units used them through about 1979. They built about 2,299 total F-100s, and during the production of the aircraft they went through several changes as issues arose with them. The first year the Air Force got a hold of the airplane and started their evaluation, they discovered this yaw and roll characteristic that took place at high speed, and it would happen so fast that the pilots couldn't react, and even if they did, they didn't have enough aerodynamic control to stop the yaw and roll, and they lost a couple of aircraft. They simply disintegrated. So they had to do some changes to the aircraft, enlarge the tail, put a few inches more wings on them. The wingspan was a little bit wider to resolve some of that instability. But it generally had a lot of adverse yaw, and the pilots had to learn to master the aircraft and deal with that adverse yaw. And if you don't know what adverse yaw is, it is, let's say you try to turn the airplane left, you bank it left, and the nose of the aircraft will swing right unless you add rudder. Well, the F-100 had a significant amount of adverse yaw, and it took a whole lot of rudder to counteract it. Another problem with the aircraft, because it had 45 degrees swept wings, it had some unusual low speed characteristics. If you slowed the airplane down for landing, and the outer wings would stall first, and it would cause the center of lift to rapidly move in front of the center of gravity, and that would cause the aircraft to violently pitch nose up. And once it got in that configuration, it was almost unrecoverable, and it became known as the Saber dance. And there was a tragic accident that happened with that event when a young Air Force pilot had his first experience with that and lost his life, and it was all on film. And if you go on YouTube or Google the F-100 Saber dance, you can see what happened to this young airman. Anyway, most of the problems with the aircraft were addressed over the years of its production, and the pilots learned how to deal with the various issues with it. And the landing issues were never really completely resolved, and pilots just learned that you don't want to land the Saber slow or try to land it slowly. You're better off landing it fast and stressing the landing gear than to try to land it slowly and gently. The aircraft, after some of these issues were resolved, it was such a good aircraft that the Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds, went from the F-84 to the F-100, and they flew it from 56 to 68. There was one year when they tried to get out of the 100. They went to the 105, and that only lasted maybe 3 or 4 months, and then they returned to the F-100. So it ended up being the longest flying airplane with the Thunderbirds until modern day when they got the F-16, and now they've been flying that for quite a few years. When the war in Vietnam got underway, the F-100s were the first fighters deployed, and they turned out to be the longest serving fighters during the war. And although the Huns were used for a variety of missions over there, they mostly were used for what they called MiG combat air patrol, and that would be they would accompany the F-105s when they were going in to do bombing, and the F-100s would keep the MiGs at bay. And in fact, the first run-in with MiGs occurred on one of these patrols with 2 F-100s, and 4 MiGs came in to attack the F-105s, and the Super Sabers engaged them and shot down 3 out of the 4. Unfortunately, they were unconfirmed kills, and this happened in April of '65, and then in June of '65, some F-4s off the USS Midway shot down 2 MiGs, and they were confirmed kills, and so the Navy got the credit of having shot down the first 2 MiGs of the war. By the end of the Vietnam conflict, the F-100s had flown 360,283 combat sorties, more than any other aircraft. The only, well, when I say aircraft, I should say more than any other airplane, because the Hueys, of course, flew more sorties. But let's talk about some of the firsts that the F-100 did. They were the first operational and production fighter to be able to go supersonic and level flight. They were the first aircraft to set a low altitude, high speed record. They won the Bendix Trophy for the highest average speed over a 2,135 mile distance. They were the first fighter to fly over the North Pole, and they were the first fighter aircraft sent to Vietnam. In summary, despite some of the major issues with the F-100 when it was first put into use, with modifications and proper piloting, it became what would have to be described as one of the really great airplanes. And pilots who flew the aircraft and learned to master its idiosyncrasies love the Super Saber. And thank you for joining in, and next I'm going to talk about the F-101 Voodoo.